Hi, everyone, and happy Friday. I'm meteorologist Brittany Van Voorhees here with WCNC Charlotte. Today was certainly a cloudier day across the region. We had temperatures in the 80s, and honestly, we have a lot to talk about. We have storms moving through the area right now. We, of course, need a tropical update. Plus, tonight is the one-year anniversary of Helene making landfall across the Big Bend of Florida. We know, of course, tomorrow is the anniversary for us here in the Western Carolinas of the impacts that we saw locally, because, again, the storm made landfall around 11 o'clock at night. So let's look at what's happening right now over the WCNC Charlotte Tower camera. If you're familiar with the Charlotte area, our station is right by the airport, so just off Bailey Graham Parkway, and you can see as it looks toward the city, we are seeing some darkening sky conditions, largely because there is some rain to track. It is one of those days where we're tracking some showers as expected. We've been talking about the chance that rain would be heaviest Friday night and Saturday morning for a few days now, and pretty much here we are. So when you look at Saturday's forecast, I know that looks overspread for the entire area. It's because most spots will see rain at some point, but it's an overnight early event tomorrow, and then more rain and storms by the evening hours. Sunday, largely dry, but not completely dry. So here's the current setup. We have, of course, a trough of low pressure offshore that brought us rain yesterday for the mountains, and now the cold front that we've been tracking for a few days is now approaching the Charlotte area. So here's where the rain is right now. Again, you can see some heavier rain down toward Lancaster County, just south of Van Wyck, up toward Jackson, Great Falls. But as you creep closer to the Charlotte metro, again, notice just some light rain, some patchy drizzle, even in a few spots. That includes Rock Hill, TKK, Fort Mill, Lake Wiley, Pineville, Wesley Chapel, Waxhaw, Weddington, Monroe, Unionville, all the way up toward Big Lick and New Salem and parts of Albemarle. And then we do have one pocket here of some heavy rain. This is pretty much right between Poplar Tent in Harrisburg. If you know Poplar Tent, y'all, that's where the Renaissance Festival typically is. So there's heavy rain right there over Poplar Tent, kind of hugging, again, I-85. And then more rain is on the way there for Kannapolis. So just to give you a perspective there on where Poplar Tent is. And this is going to be moving up toward the China Grove area and eventually Salisbury over the next few hours. And then again, some lighter rain too on the eastern side of Union County. As we look ahead toward this evening, we are expecting a few more showers and storms possible, but more action, of course, expected expected too up in the mountains and foothills. So I know Vanessa's still up there with our Helene coverage, and she's probably seeing some rain there in Watauga County right about now. So again, as we enter the overnight hours, more chances for rain. It will be widespread at times, but heavy rain as well, moving into parts of the region. I say that because we could see light rain for everybody, but only a few pockets will be heavy. So not everybody sees that. Here's tomorrow at 5 o'clock. There's 11. So notice this is the midday lull I was mentioning. And then there we are again at 11 p.m. So it's not going to rain for a lot of the daytime hours, but early morning and again, more storms in the evening before we do dry out pretty nicely by Sunday. There will be a few sprinkles here and there and more clouds, but Sunday is certainly the pick of the week if you had to have one. And then here comes more rain on Monday, as of course we'll be tracking what's going on in the tropical Atlantic basin. So lots to talk about here. And of course, if we don't get to anything, we'll have more time with Chief Meteorologist Tim Buckley coming up from WFMY. But we have Humberto there, still on the eastern side of this picture. It is still it is now a hurricane as of right now, happened earlier today. But now we have a new system, potential tropical cyclone number 9. This was Invest 94L that we were watching earlier this week. Now we get so many questions about what the heck potential tropical cyclone means. So back in the day, which this wasn't that long ago, but let's just say back in the day for semantics. So National Hurricane Center did not issue watches and warnings or put out a forecast track unless there was a tropical depression or named storm. So a few years ago, which normally when they put out new operational, things, there was probably time where they were experimental behind the scenes. But a few years ago, they started this, putting out a potential tropical cyclone. It gives them the opportunity to A, release an early forecast track, and B, issue watches and warnings for areas that could be impacted in the next 24 to 36 hours. Because let's say that you live in Myrtle Beach. I'm just using that as an example. I used to work there at the ABC station. What if there's a storm right off the coast that you know is there, that you know is going to bring impacts, but you have no tropical storm watches and warnings because it's not a depression or a named storm, because it just doesn't have the technical characteristics yet? Nobody wants that, right? So potential tropical cyclone is just their way to issue those watches and warnings, get a forecast track out earlier before a storm technically meets criteria to be a tropical depression or a tropical storm. So as we look long range in potential tropical cyclone 9, there are a lot of questions still. Yesterday we looked at different scenarios. In my professional opinion, I think the scenario of completely staying out to sea looks very unlikely, but there is a chance that the storm gets close to the coast and then stays out to sea. But I don't think a zero impact scenario for the coastal Carolinas is on the table at this point. It will just be how many impacts. Does it stay offshore, but it gets close and brings us rain and maybe a little bit of surge, or does it move inland? So again, we're going to talk more about this, of course, with Tim coming up. There's those watches and warnings for the Bahamas. Again, that's the reason why we're going PTC 9. Here's the actual official forecast track from the National Hurricane Center. You can see in the near term through Monday at 2 p.m., you can see that 75 mile per hour. It's a Category 1 hurricane at that point based on this track, and there's a lot of certainty. Notice how skinny the track is. But as we look wider, when you see a big blob at the end of a forecast track like this, that shows uncertainty, which we've talked a lot about the uncertainty in the forecast track. So right now, the 5-day cone has anywhere from Jacksonville, Florida, up toward Jacksonville, North Carolina. And if you're familiar with that, there is a Marine base there. So that's near the Fayetteville area. So keep in mind, there's a lot of uncertainty still here. I want to show you some model data just to show you guys the difference in where some of these models have the storm. I will preface this by saying that this is not an official forecast, but this comes from the GFS, the American model, and you can see some heavy rain for Charlotte and areas south. However, the European model keeps a lot of this a little bit further north and some better rainfall potential for areas in the Queen City and maybe over towards places like Chirac, Myrtle Beach. So Euro's a little bit further up north and northeast with the heaviest rain, but the European has also tracked a little bit further offshore, and I'll show you that here in just a second. So here's the current GFS model with winds. There's Tuesday morning around midnight, some tropical storm force winds for Myrtle Beach, Charleston, and then the storm moves inland, and that could cause some tropical storm force winds for places like Charlotte and Columbia. However, as we look at the European model, the latest, I'm going to show you something interesting. All right, notice this. It's got a stronger storm. Notice the Charleston wind gusts, Myrtle Beach wind gusts around 60 miles an hour. But you see where that circle goes? I'm going to back it up in just a second. We're going to look at it again. So here's that 64 mile per hour gust. That's Tuesday morning. Circle goes toward the coast and then boom, goes away. So the European is picking up on that potential that it gets close, but then it jots out to sea. So again, this is what I mean by impacts, even if it doesn't actually make landfall, because a complete turn out to sea at this point looks relatively unlikely because of the fact that the storm gets close to the Carolinas, which means, again, even if it stays out to sea, we're still seeing some impacts along the coast and inland. Now, if you are wondering why the Euro is picking up on that jot out to sea, that would indicate that Umberto, as we've talked about, is going to try to use the Fujiwara effect and pull the storm away. That would be a higher influence from Umberto pulling it away. That's the European. Whereas Imelda, which is likely the name that this storm gets, moving inland is closer to what the GFS is showing, the American, which is pulling it in because of that upper level low. So again, we talked about this yesterday, and Tim actually used a really good explanation, I think, here, where the two were playing tug of war, right? The upper level low and Umberto were playing tug of war. It's who will win out that is largely going to depend on what happens here. Umberto, now being a hurricane, definitely is going to help it try to pull that storm out to sea. But again, there's still a lot of question marks. As Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich and I talked about earlier, this could bring impacts to us here in Charlotte in terms of heavy rain and some gusty winds, or it could be a big ol' nothing burger. So there is still a lot of scenarios still on the table. But again, I still think impacts will happen in the Carolinas regardless, because even if that close proximity happens and here in Charlotte we don't get any changes, it will still bring something, right? Rain, storm surge, higher wave heights, current risk. So again, there's still a lot of questions. I went a little bit over my time, so we're going to talk more about this with Chief Meteorologist Tim Buckley coming up here in just a second. For now, we're going to take a quick 2-minute break, and I hope you'll join us on the other side for more tropics coverage and a look back at the National Weather Service's forecast of Hurricane Helene upon the 1-year anniversary. Thanks, everybody, and welcome back. We are joined by Chief Meteorologist Tim Buckley from WFNY. And it feels like I was just talking to you, because I was.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot. We've been doing a lot of talking, haven't we? And a lot of looking at weather models and weather data. And this is one of those times. I think for meteorologists, probably it's hurricanes and it's snowstorms that can really kind of consume your thinking for days and days and days on end. And this is one of those times that we're kind of running overdrive right now.
Yeah, it certainly is. Before we get to our more in-depth tropical topic, we do still have to note the fact that tonight marks the 1-year anniversary of Hurricane Helene making landfall in the Big Bend of Florida, and then, of course, came right up through the Big Bend of Florida and eventually brought catastrophic and devastating river flooding as well as flash flooding, landslides, and mudslides for the mountains of North Carolina. So on the heels of Helene's 1-year anniversary, and of course, us tracking multiple other systems in the tropics, I did get an opportunity to talk to the National Weather Service's Trisha Palmer. She was in my story earlier this week about kind of a National Weather Service report card, right? What they did well, what they really want to work on, and of course, how they can improve that in the future. Listen in, and Tim and I will be right back. Hurricane Helene was a once-in-a-lifetime event, only rivaling flooding from 1916 and 1940. Trisha Palmer, the warning coordination meteorologist at the National Weather Service in Greenville-Spartanburg, says when a storm of this magnitude hasn't happened in almost 100 years, the message to the public can become extremely difficult.
This is going to be bad. Places that don't normally flood are going to flood. We relied heavily on our partners in media, our partners in emergency management, and we used the analogs. Even though people weren't alive back in 1916, there is generational history, there's generational knowledge and memory.
A lot of this difficulty comes from optimism bias, meaning we underestimate the likelihood a weather event will impact us.
Even with a tornado warning, we're thinking it's not going to impact us. A flash flood warning, unless you're right by the creek, you're not thinking it's going to impact you.
Palmer says while the rainfall and flooding forecast verified fairly well, the team does want to work on their messaging for wind impacts. This often gets complicated because even though Helene was technically a tropical storm over the Carolinas, the gusts were still near hurricane force.
These might be 80, possibly 90 mile per hour wind gusts. But when people think about a wind gust, they think about a severe thunderstorm. And it's over and done with, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, not 2 or 3 hours. The long-term power outages, some of that, we're trying to figure out how can we improve on that messaging.
While Palmer does hope the awareness of Helene helps weather communication in the future, she does encourage everyone to take every weather event seriously.
We don't want oh, I've been through Helene, nothing's going to be that bad, I'm going to be fine. Or we don't want to start hyping, hey, it might be close to... What are the chances that it's going to be another Helene again? Very, very, very slim.
You may remember that there was a predecessor rain event before Helene impacted the Carolinas. Palmer says the PRE accounted for about a third of the overall rainfall, but flooding would have been severe regardless.
During Helene itself, those rainfall rates were incredible, so it probably wouldn't have made much of a difference from the flash flooding perspective. But the devastating river flooding, it probably wouldn't have been quite so bad.
Some of the water basins have been changed forever due to Helene, but there is still a ton of debris removal happening. For now, there won't be any changes to hydrologic models, but long-term impacts will be reevaluated once the removal is completed. For WCNC Charlotte, I'm meteorologist Brittany Van Voorhees. So, Tim, as you know, there's only so many things that you can put in a story. So I just wanted to talk about a few things real quick with you just to get your take.
Yeah.
The hydrologic models thing. So Trisha is unique in which she's a meteorologist, but her husband is the hydrologist that works at the same office. So she had a unique answer for that because actually Brad's the one who asked me to ask that because there's so much debris. So she said there's so many rocks and things like that still in the waterways. So they're not going to remap all of those waterways and water basins now because once the debris removal happens, they would just have to remap them again. But they are noticing that a lot of the flash flood warnings and things like that are happening quicker, and they're expecting it's like the rocks. And for people who are at home are like, what the heck are you talking about? Think if you had like a tub, right, of like water in your house and you were trying to do, I don't know, an experiment with your kids, and you put, you know, a bunch of rocks or pebbles or something in there and you poured water in that compared to an empty tub with just water, you know, it fills up a lot quicker because of the surface area. That's essentially what we're talking about. So there's just a lot of you know what junk in the waters.
Yeah. It's really interesting. You know, the whole landscape changed, and so it is different than it was. And I think, I'd imagine, we don't know all the ways that it's different yet. And part of the way that you learn is you get more weather events and you see how they behave differently than they used to, is kind of what she's going through there. And a lot of people might not realize a hydrologist specifically, their job is to know these things and how the rivers react to things like the weather. And that's something that we could be looking at quite a bit when it comes to rainfall in the next couple of days. How do the rivers kind of react to that in North and South Carolina?
Yeah, and I think one thing she noted too is that while the flooding and rainfall forecasts themselves were relatively good, a lot of their models, while they had where the rain was going to be heaviest, they still underestimated the rainfall. But she and I talked back and forth a little bit about this. Oftentimes, as you know, that happens because it was probably a once-in-a-lifetime event, hopefully a once-in-a-lifetime event. So they are not expecting it to be 30 inches of rain, just like we weren't expecting maybe it to really get to 30 inches of rain. So,
or you can think back, I remember, this is not that long ago, only a couple of months ago when we had Tropical Storm Chantal, there were a couple models the day of. We have many models that we look at, those smaller scale ones that run every hour. There were a couple ones of those that said, you're going to get like 8, 9, 12 inches of rain. It's like, gosh, that seems a little bit much, right? But it ended up that it was, in fact, more than that. Some people ended up getting, like we said, about 20 inches in just a couple of days with Chantal. So sometimes these things are almost hard to believe when you see them in a forecast, and then you've got to be brave enough, I guess, to put that out there if you believe it to be true.
Yeah. Well, what we always say, guidance, not gospel, right? It's not ever set in stone, but we use every model as guidance. Speaking of guidance, Tim, let's talk guidance with PTC 9.
I need some guidance. Someone needs to help us out with this.
We'll help out each other.
Yeah, we've tracked a lot of storms before. I don't know about you, Brittany. I can't remember one quite like this. They always are different. But this is a pickle for sure. And I see the graphic you've got up here. It seems like what you've done is you've kind of positioned them up until the point of agreement, or up until the point of disagreement. Because through this point, on Monday afternoon, we kind of know what's going to happen, don't we? Yeah,
it's going to be likely right off Georgia, South Carolina coast. But let's see how much this looks like a plate of spaghetti. Let's go into time.
And there they go. Scattering like fleas.
Okay, so we were texting about this before the show. In my opinion, I feel like a complete turnout to sea, like zero impacts including near the coast, is most likely not going to happen. Because I still think that even if it gets close, like we showed Monday at 3 o'clock, that still will bring some rain, wind, storm surge for the coast. But I do think that in that scenario, while the coast would get impacted, that would be the least impacts for us inland. So I just saw some tweets and social media stuff from Met saying minimal impacts, I guess, or little to no impacts. And I do think that was a little bit misleading, just because if the storm gets close, even if it's just an elevated rip current risk or higher rain chances, that is still an impact from the storm. Would you agree?
I agree. And I think we have to remember this is high stakes stuff.
Yeah.
So our job is to let you, as a viewer, as a weather consumer, our job is to let you know about risk and give you a forecast. And there's a difference between the two. So right now, everyone in the Carolinas has a risk from this storm, and we're trying to narrow down that risk and kind of take it away as best we can from place to place. But right now, there's a risk of getting hit by a hurricane if you live in South Carolina. And in Charlotte, there's probably not a risk of hurricane conditions. I think we could probably say that at this point.
For sure.
But there's certainly a risk of flooding, and that's a risk for most of the Carolinas still. But when you have these different options on the table, this is what makes the forecast part a lot harder. So if someone said to you, you need to pick one of these paths, and it's got to be inland or it's got to be out to sea, well, then you're down to an odds game. And at this point, I don't know if it's quite 50-50. I would say the inland odds are probably still a little bit higher, and that's not what we want to happen, because that's worse. But it is interesting. I've kind of framed this as a bit of a tug of war, almost. The graphic I have here with the low and the hurricane, Imelda is going to be in between the low, inland, and the hurricane, which is Umberto, out to sea. And if we're trying to make sense of why things have been changing, Yesterday, Brittany, it seemed like the big change was everything wanted to come inland and really smack the Carolinas a lot worse. And the reasoning behind that was that Imelda, or what was going to become Imelda, was trending faster and a little more north. And so at that point, well, okay, Umberto's going to be too far behind. It's not going to be able to pull, and it's not going to be able to win that tug of war. Well, today, the trend has been for Imelda to be slower, and by consequence, a little far south. So if that's the case, we could again maybe be in a world where Umberto could start to win a little bit more of that tug of war. And so if it is a little bit slower, then maybe Umberto's able to pull it out to sea. I don't know the answer to that right now.
Yeah, and nobody does.
And that's frustrating because we want to tell you the answer, but we just don't know the answer just yet. So we have to tell you both. And we hope it gets pulled out to sea because no one wants a flood disaster. Because the result of it getting pulled inland, you could see it sitting for a couple days.
Yeah, because of that stalled front, yeah. I also think this was a good reason when we talked yesterday about how we gave the explanation as to why the models don't know what's going on until the center forms. As you mentioned, it was expected to be faster and further north. So once the center is formed, now the data in the models is much better because it's being inputted. The hurricane hunters now can go in and they have a close center to work with, which they didn't have yesterday. So while 2 days ago, all the models were showing out to sea, and yesterday all models were showing in, now it's very clear why we have that split, because the storm path, where it was, whatever you want to call it, changed. And we expected that. And that's why we wanted people to make sure that they weren't locking in on an out to sea or an in, because there's still so many questions to be brought up. I know we have questions that are coming in from some of our viewers, though. I don't know if you want to try to answer some of them.
Sure. Let's get to that.
All right. So Jeb's sending one. Actually, Jeb asked a question earlier that I think is important to answer. So someone was asking, or Jeb was asking the question of depression versus named storm. So in order to have a tropical depression or a named storm, you need three things. You need winds over 34 miles an hour, a close center of circulation, and a warm core low. So essentially no influence from a frontal boundary. Now, if it's 34 to 38 miles an hour, that's a tropical depression. Once you get to 39 or greater, it's a tropical storm. So you can have it jump from PTC straight to a storm, but sometimes it actually takes the trek of depression, storm, hurricane. He was doing an interview, or he said he was like, I don't know the difference even after this interview is over, so I wanted to be clear about that. Do you want to take the next question, Tim, the one that was just posted in our little chat in our chat?
Sure. Oh, yeah, so I see it here. So the question is, are you saying the whole state will be hit? We are in Kershaw in Lancaster County. So that's a good question. And you know, whether you're talking about South Carolina or North Carolina, will the whole state be hit? Well, then you get to the question of, well, what does it mean to get hit? Does it mean to get rainfall? Because everybody in the Carolinas is probably going to get rainfall. But then you have to break it down. Some of that's this weekend, then some of that is from the potential hurricane or tropical storm. This is not something I hand drew. This is from the Weather Service, the WPC as we call them. Right now, they're outlining about 5 to 6, 7 inches or more in coastal North Carolina, coastal South Carolina. But notice the mountains actually, they don't put that much rain up in the Asheville area, for example. I think also it might be interesting to see if this thing does stay pretty far south, the Outer Banks might not have that bit of a tough time. So it does depend on where you are in terms of what you might see, and we're still trying to narrow down those impacts. And I think that what we need to do, Brittany, over the next day or two is kind of remove people from the risk, is say, here are the areas that are at most risk, and then here are the people that are at lower risk.
Definitely. I think that if you're in Charlotte, and maybe, Tim, you might agree with this for Greensboro, I would prepare for now and over the next week there to be multiple rounds of rain. Everyone will likely see a raindrop at some point, whether that's this weekend from the cold front and that influence, or from next week from the tropics. But either way, you should prepare accordingly for rain and then the potential for higher wind gusts. Because, again, even if the storm gets close but never makes landfall, if you remember with Chantal, folks here in the Piedmont, I know you guys had that too, it was a pretty breezy day. Even though it was just a minor breeze, no trees knocked over, it was still relatively breezy.
And there's going to be a pressure gradient impact as well, but because even by the end of the week, you're trying to have a big fall high. We haven't talked about this. Fall air is trying to build in toward the end of this thing, and there's going to be a big pressure difference. So there could be just some regular old steady winds that are a part of this, which gets even more complicated. But fall is on the way, by the way, by the end of next week.
I think that if you have friends or family who live especially in the South Carolina coast, make sure that they're kind of in their ready, set stage where they have their plan in place.
Sure.
They know what to do if they were to be asked to evacuate, and they're checking in back on the forecast probably multiple times a day. My family has some family that my aunt and uncle texted me about their friends who live in Charleston, and my advice to them was to find a local meteorologist and a local TV station that they trust and to check back multiple times a day. So that would be my advice to you guys watching this.
Good advice, and just stay informed. That's the best thing you can do at this point. It's coming up pretty quick.
Yeah. So we won't be back, of course, on this regular stream with Tim Saturday and Sunday, but we will be back with the whole crew this upcoming week, starting Monday, 6:30. Yeah. Don't forget to tune in. And Tim, I know we talked about this as well, but FMY Plus and WCNC Plus, we will have continuous coverage all throughout the weekend. So make sure you're checking back multiple times a day. And bonus, just keep it on all day and you won't miss a thing.
You bet.
Have a good weekend, Tim.
You too.